went from living in the city you invested to moving 3.5 hours away and then still keeping all your rental properties. How did you manage that, and what sort of tips and tricks do you have for viewers on can you manage from afar?
I used to be militantly in favor of hands-on management. The house that I used to live in, we still own, but that I used to live in 24/7 is located directly in the middle of the buildings that we own. If I took an afternoon, I could probably walk to most of the buildings that we own from that house. I felt that being as hands-on as possible was the way to prevent problems, the way to basically grab onto every last dollar of cash flow and ensure that you could maximize your performance. And I have flipped the switch. I'm now 3.5 hours away from all of our buildings. If one of them is on fire, I can't go. I can't get there in time. There's nothing I can do.
What is up, YouTube? In today's video, we're going to be talking about managing real estate from afar. Now, if I had a nickel for every time someone asked me this question, I'd own all the real estate. Not just in London, not just in Ontario, not just in Canada, not just in North America. I mean, like, I'd own the entire world, because everyone seems to have these limiting beliefs around owning real estate outside of the city you live in. In today's video, we're going to dive deep into that subject matter with Jon Kepler, who's got 160, 180 plus tenants he manages, all from a distance. So this is a great example of how you can do this, but there are some catches. You need some systems, you need the right people. Anyways, we're going to dive all into that in today's video. What is up, YouTube? Matt McKeever here with Jon Kepler again, and we're going to be discussing a very popular topic on my YouTube channel, and that is, can you afford to manage afar from your buildings? And so the reason I think this comes up so often is there's a lot of viewers from the greater Toronto area in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, that they know they can't get cash flow in that market, and they want to invest in markets like London, like Chatham, like Windsor, and get cash flow, but they're constantly held back from what I consider to be the limiting belief that you can't invest outside of where you live. And so recently, Jon, you went through a big transition in your business model where you went from living in the city you invested to moving 3.5 hours away and then still keeping all your rental properties. So I'd love to pick your brain in today's video just on how did you manage that, and what sort of tips and tricks do you have for viewers on can you manage from afar? And I'm guessing, spoiler alert, you can.
You can. I'm excited to talk about this because I used to be militantly in favor of hands-on management. The house that I used to live in, we still own, but that I used to live in 24/7 is located directly in the middle of the buildings that we own. If I took an afternoon, I could probably walk to most of the buildings that we own from that house. It was pivotal, right in the middle. I felt that being as hands-on as possible was the way to prevent problems, the way to basically grab onto every last dollar of cash flow and ensure that you could maximize your performance. And I have flipped the switch. I'm now 3.5 hours away from all of our buildings. If one of them is on fire, I can't go. I can't get there in time. There's nothing I can do. So I like to think that I have a broad yet deep perspective on this, because you can manage from afar. And I think you just need to be committed to a strategy, execute on the strategy that is being right in the middle of the properties until you decide to make a change, and then build out your policies and make sure that it works.
Yeah, and so one thing that I think would be great to talk about as well, and clearly your portfolio was positioned to be able to do this, but when it comes to self-managing, I find a lot of investors, especially beginner investors, they lie to themselves and they tell themselves they're getting a certain cash flow number, when realistically, no, because you're self-managing, you know, you're not paying out that property manager. And what happens if and when either you can't manage it or you don't want to manage it? So what's your opinion on that, as far as, you know, should people that are even still self-managing at least theoretically allocate or make sure their numbers work with a PM company?
Well, acting like management is free is unrealistic. Management is not free. Your time is not free. You absolutely must value your time. Beyond that, I was able to agree to and get comfortable with the change in thinking because I was encouraged to do so by appraisers. So as you begin to look at larger buildings, they expect to include a management fee.
Right.
When you're looking at buildings, especially mixed-use buildings for sale, the expectation is that the vendor has included a management fee in the financials. And if they haven't, then that's something that you get to gripe about. Listen, vendor, you're being unrealistic. You didn't even include this fee. Your cash flow is lower than you say, and your cap rate is worse, and I'm not going to tolerate this. So it's something that you have to build out. And even if you think that you can do it for free, or that it's worth acting like your time is worth zero for the greater good, yeah, you can manage a triplex or two on your own. At some point, you're going to have genuine costs. You're not going to be able to do everything yourself. And since you're committed to your business long term and you will be hiring things out, why not take reasonable steps right from the beginning to plan for that, to plan to have the budget to pay people and to ensure that you can afford to make the right decisions instead of, making bad decisions to hold on to the last dollar of cash flow.
And so had you ever tried before moving away from your properties to completely outsource the process, or was like moving away a way to force your hand?
I think moving away was a way to force my hand. This has been something that I've loosely been considering for some time. I would think about the ramifications or think about the policy changes that would be necessary in a rather haphazard way until we located this house and decided that we are going to move here. And then, of course, I got quite serious quite quickly.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, as long as you plan for it and you map it out, it makes sense to do. And I don't think people are sufficiently aware of the benefits of being away from your property. Again, I can talk both books. As I said earlier, I was militantly in favor of self-management. We'll call it central self-management, being right in the thick of it. And I was also very interested in being a micromanager, which it doesn't always generate the best returns. It generates good returns at first until it starts to cause problems. So ultimately, this was a new chapter. We decided to take our model and flip it on its head and rely on our policies, procedures, and best practices to ensure that we dealt with the same issues the same way every single time, and that it was somewhat more automated, you could say.
And so there's a really popular saying these days, are you working in your business or working on your business? And it's almost cliche at this point in a lot of the entrepreneur circles I run in, but I think it's really important for real estate investors to think about that as well, right? Yeah. Because one thing is, there's always more to do on your properties if you're self-managing. Maybe you decide, okay, I'm actually going to shovel the laneway, or I'm going to cut the grass, and take it very granular to where you're pretty much doing every single task. But what happens is, it's so easy to fill up your calendar, isn't it, when you're self-managing, that you're never out there actively looking to acquire more properties or build relationships with new financiers or private sellers. So I'd love to hear just kind of your thoughts and opinion on that. Did you find that when you were self-managing, it was really easy to fill up your day with just tasks?
Oh, certainly, yes. Fortunately, the frustration with that occurring so frequently is what's encouraged me, induced me to begin making some changes. So in terms of tenant communications, I think that was probably the first area we made changes in. So I used to talk to tenants on the phone at length, especially the ones that I either liked or I felt had some degree of power over me, which is ridiculous.
I know that feeling.
There's something to avoid. Right, so I don't want this person to sue me. I'm gonna let them talk for 45 minutes. Not the secret to success. So we ratcheted that down. We explained to people that we want them to text. There were also some changes in the general marketplace in Ontario that helped. E-transfers didn't exist when I got started. Now e-transfers are prevalent, so we don't need to present to tenants in person, let's say, because if you present to tenants to collect the rent, you also present to them so that you can be talked to for 10 or 15 minutes about anything under the sun. So they're just little things like that. You spend more time in the business, you get smarter, you get to refine your policies and eliminate some of the waste. But one thing you won't be able to do, one thing you have to remember as a limitation, is that whenever you engage in a task, that's energy. Yeah. You can say, I'm disciplined, or I'm focused, or I'm energetic, or I'm fully caffeinated, and I can handle this, no big deal. I'm just gonna handle this extra thing before I even blink or notice, and then it'll just be done and I won't even think about it. That's not true. Every single thing you do requires effort, requires mental energy, if not physical energy. Even if it takes 5 minutes, it's really something to consider how you really should think about how to build your systems and how to prevent some of those things from happening.
Yeah.
I micromanaged far too much at the end. It's nicer to have a barrier between me and the property so that I'm spending my time on the right things.
And I think another thing a lot of self-managers I noticed do, and I was guilty of this when I was self-managing, was we lied to ourselves about how long it really takes to take that 5-minute task. You're like, oh, change a doorknob. That's like a 5-minute task. But you're like, well, actually, I gotta go to Home Depot. I have to buy the doorknob. I then have to drive to the property. I have to change the doorknob. Something's gonna go awry there because like I maybe don't have all the tools in this vehicle. It's actually in my other vehicle. And then all of a sudden it can be really easy for that 5-minute task to spiral into like a 1-hour task. And to me, I constantly found myself just losing time to these random activities. And I found it was really important to start asking myself, is this a $20 task or a $200 task? Because I know like I want my time to be worth more than $20 an hour. And so it became really important for me to understand that my time was better spent finding the next deal, finding the next money partner, finding the next opportunity, rather than focusing on just maintaining what I currently had existing. I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Well, absolutely. One thing that I should be able to sell everyone on quite quickly is the benefits of task batching. So I think everyone understands that if you do similar tasks together instead of randomly being all over the place, that's beneficial. I shouldn't need to pitch it more than that. So what are you going to do to set yourself up so that you're in a position to task batch? So changing a doorknob on one side of town and then unplugging a toilet on the other side of town is not task batching.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I consider where my energy was going and even my physical location, you know, where can I go? How long does it take me to get there? It didn't take me long to realize that the less often I had to leave my house, the more I was focused on being at home doing things, whether it was on the phone or on the computer, the more I could get done with absolutely no waste, not a second of waste. So that might be what caused me to consider moving away from the properties and really just handing management off. The idea that I'm going to be working no matter what, and if there's no waste and all tasks are batched, I get to accomplish the highest number of tasks without any wasted effort.
Yeah. Love it. And so because you've been on both sides of the fence, both self-managing as well as outsourcing, what are some tips for people that are maybe deep in the trenches today self-managing, maybe some tasks they can slowly start handing off or slowly start creating systems and procedures around, rather than simply being the savant that goes in and always fixes every problem themselves?
Well, first of all, don't beat yourself up. I think that if you're self-managing today and you're getting tired of it, I mean, you can't change the past anyway, but look at your past as a time for you to have gained experience. So you now know more about property management than you otherwise would have. And whether you think so or not, you're very well positioned to determine what policies your business needs, because you have been in the trenches. You're not an aloof CEO who has nothing in common with the workers, right? That's not what's going on here. So you know your business. You know what needs to happen. The trick is systematizing things so that the same tasks get dealt with the same way every single time. And beyond that, making excellent decisions in terms of your personnel and making sure that tasks are getting assigned to the right person and that the person is responsible and capable of completing it the first time.
Love it. And then, so is there some maybe like little tactical pieces that you could give out? I know you mentioned like e-transfers. So one of the things like I loved doing when I was still self-managing was email addresses are essentially free. So why not set up an email address for each property? And then that way it's a really easy way to collect the rents, but still be able to track the process. As well for myself, I know that like just removing myself from one layer. So when I was doing like rolling up my sleeves and doing every task, the first thing I did was, okay, now I'm just going to become dispatcher. So I'm still very like on top of everything, like dispatches come in and then I dispatch out. So a tenant would call me still with the complaint. I'm still handling the complaint, but then I'm going to like use a handyman or a cleaner to go do that task rather than me be the person to drive to Home Depot and do it. Anything else come to mind as far as like little tactical pieces we could share with the audience?
I think the one for me that had the biggest impact was that I, under no circumstances, will be induced to show up. So again, the building's on fire, I can't get there. That's not to say that I never show up. I plan and schedule when I attend. I schedule I choose to attend when I wish to accomplish something in particular, and that's not because rent's due. I want to see something in the building. I want to plan for something. Any kind of high-level processing or decision-making that I feel requires a site visit, I'll go and do a site visit, but it's always on my terms. So it seems like an oversimplification to say don't let people push you around, but I think for those of us who are in the business and already working hard and already experiencing some levels of success, you think that being pushed around is okay, or at least worth tolerating, and I don't think we're open with ourselves in terms of how harmful it can be and how it affects your mindset and your ability to work on other high-level tasks. So I made it physically unrealistic for myself to attend in any reasonable period of time. So we have people on the ground who can attend, and that's it. That was my number one takeaway. Other things such as e-transfers and being able to coach tenants from the beginning in terms of what our expectations are for communication, that's helped. So getting them to text, getting them to not talk on the phone for too long to myself or to a colleague, and just other little hacks like that. We at some point we could make a lengthy list of the little things that we're able to do, right? And some of them change year to year as well. But I think the more negativity I experience in relation to whatever the task is, the more of an incentive I have to outsource it or deal with it. Or if I'm not going to, one option is taking a negative task and deciding that the person dealing with it is not going to be me. Another option in parallel with that is trying to change how that task is perceived or how tenants respond to it so that it's just not as negative in the first place, right? Yeah. Because I also don't want to just take negative, unfulfilling tasks and just dump them on my team. I care about my team. So sometimes policy changes can turn those negatives into positive.
Yeah, and so something that just kind of came to mind is both of us have kind of insourced the property management function, right? So we've hired employees, we have people that work for us full time that are doing our property management. What's your thoughts on literally handing over the keys to a completely separate third-party entity?
Well, I think the fear that people have, which is not unfounded, is that you hire someone new, maybe you have references or referrals, you think they're going to be great, you give them the keys to the kingdom, and then you have an Armageddon scenario. It's just a nightmare. Rent doesn't get collected, buildings have maintenance issues, municipal inspectors get on your case all at once and all of a sudden. So I think that if you move purposefully and delegate tasks and procedures one at a time, you can entirely prevent that possibility. So if someone is going to hurt you, and they're going to hurt you soon, don't give them too much of an opening to fall on their faces when it comes to something that's vital, right? So what we did is we had people start off in small roles. Cleaning was one role for one of our key people. And so we just slowly give them more and more. And I think as they understand that you are reliable and you're worth working with, and that you give you present a good opportunity for them, the more willing they are to take on additional responsibility, and frankly, the more willing they are to stay with you and grow with you. So you're building someone's career as well. That's another thing to think about. They're going to need to advance, and you're going to need to come up with that plan, because everyone, you're responsible. Everything is your fault. So to a degree, you're also responsible for the success of your people. Beyond their tasks in your business, you're also responsible for their well-being and their successful career.
And as far as like payment structure and compensation, do you just pay like a flat rate a month to manage, like to have someone manage your properties? Is it hourly basis? Do you have like some sort of bonus structure? Is it percentage of rents?
I know people have a range of opinions on this, and all of the things that Matt said exist in the marketplace, right? When we do management for other building owners, we don't do a lot of it. It's a minor portion of my business, but I got roped into it, and here we are. So sometimes our business gets paid a percentage of rents. And so we have a different structure in terms of our people. So to answer the question directly, we don't give our people a percentage of rents. We give them either an hourly rate, or in certain cases we'll do a flat rate. I feel that flat rates can have some potential pitfalls. Sometimes people will just try to do the bare minimum in order to collect the flat rate. If you have a particularly great person who doesn't see the world that way, then you might end up overworking them. Suddenly they're doing everything for the flat rate, and they might do it with a smile at first, but you are burning them out. You are treating them unfairly potentially. So I hesitate to do the flat rate structure, but we do have some of those right now for people who want it. And also, when I agree to do that, I also do regular check-ins. So I'm going to make sure going forward that we're not continuing down a compensation path that works poorly for them or that makes them feel taken advantage of.
Love it. If you were to completely outsource the property management function and hire a third party, how would you go about that? What sort of process would you do? I'm assuming referrals would be involved.
Absolutely, referrals. Yes, I would need to have. This is my personal answer, but I would need to have quite a strong relationship with someone who works with them already. So this is a new person, untrusted, first task, first role. I would need a very good friend and colleague of mine to tell me that it was going to be okay, or I'd hesitate. And even in that situation, I wouldn't hand it over all at once. If you are in a situation where you must for some reason, try to hand over less rather than more. Again, we've been insourcing, right? And I was able to basically flip the switch so that I moved here, and then day number one, moving here, we kind of had it all set up. But if a viewer finds themselves in a similar situation, maybe they're going to move hours away, they do all their own management, and now they can do none of their own management, maybe try a transitional period where the manager is managing half of the properties or a portion of the properties. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a couple of uncomfortable months. Maybe you're running a little ragged as you are getting that property manager warmed up, just to make sure that you don't hand everything over at once and you don't have the potential for a very bad situation. But try to do it over time. If you think you can't do it over time, try to be more creative. You can probably still hand it over task by task so that there isn't as much risk and there isn't as much, even beyond having a bad person in general, just the onboarding risk. Good person who's a good worker who's overloaded by your onboarding process. That's not good for anybody either.
Yeah, I think those are some great tips. What tasks would you want to hold back? Which task would be kind of the last task you hand off? And if you want a little bit of time, I can go first because one immediately popped to mind for me, and that would be filling vacancies. So while I would love the idea to immediately outsource that process, my fear would be, especially in tenant-friendly markets like here in Ontario, Canada, or say you're in California, is that if you get the wrong tenant in, that can be something that really drags out for an extended period of time. Where my thought process is with an existing, handing over the management of existing tenancies, there's a lower risk because I've probably built up some goodwill and some, social credit with those tenants that if things do go off the rail, I can probably step back in after a few months and bring them back to baseline, back to kind of an acceptable level in my opinion, where once I get a bad tenant in, it can really deteriorate the entire property and every other tenant's experience.
See, that's interesting because that's an amazing answer. My first answer was money.
Yeah, that's a good one too, though.
So I don't take my hands off the financials. I just don't. If someone is going to cause problems for me in terms of work or in terms of service or maintenance, that's one thing. But I'm not going to have a property manager walk off with 30% of my revenue.
Yeah.
So that was my number one, though now since I've had a minute to consider your answer, that's obviously very important as well. We've been fortunate to have an excellent leasing agent on board. So they haven't made a substantial misstep, which I guess is a nice position for me to be in. At the same time, even that we broke down into steps. So when they expressed interest in being a leasing agent, they were allowed to post the ad, but it was my ad. I wrote it at first. And then we would do showings together. So they would shadow me and they get to see how I do a showing. And then they get to do showings. And even after that, even if they're writing their own ads, taking their own photos, attracting their own applicants, I'm still looking at applications. So that's one thing that I still haven't taken my hands off of. It's just, as much as we talked earlier about 5-minute tasks and how you don't want to have too many 5-minute tasks, getting the wrong tenant in, will cost you several $1,000s at minimum. So it is worth taking the 5 minutes for me to review the application, even if he's already read it. I can just look at it. Again, it's a form that I'm familiar with, so I'm looking at certain lines, I'm looking to see certain things on certain lines. Even if someone else is checking the references, I know that those references have been checked. So even though he is taking over perhaps 90% of the leasing process, it's still ultimately my rubber stamp on it. And so that gives me comfort. And then if things go wrong, frankly, it's always my fault.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the buck stops with us as entrepreneurs. Having really a strong sense of an internal locus of control, I think, is like extremely important, whether you want to be successful in real estate or any other sort of business endeavor. I know in this video, as well as previous videos, you've referenced a team. Do you mind kind of breaking down the different team members and what their roles are currently in your business?
So I'll break it down in two ways. So there are 4 of us who are hitting the ground every day, working extremely hard. And then we have a number of subcontractors outside of that who we may talk to every single week, but we aren't the only client for those subcontractors. So that's the size of our team. I love real estate because you're able to get a lot done. You're able to manage a lot of assets. The dollar figures are very high with a small team, right? It's probably only second to perhaps the hedge fund industry, where I've heard of $100 million, $150 million funds with 6 key employees, and that's it. But beyond that, we have what I'll term a team system within the people that work with us. So we have different categories of tasks, and each one of them is referred to as a team. I should pull up my phone and go over it, but I'm going from memory here, but we have the financial reporting team, does the accounting, does the books, keeps track of that sort of thing. We have a tenant customer service team. We have a maintenance and renovations team. And not all of the people we work with will have access to those files and systems. So someone who, like, for example, there's one person in our business, they do a lot of the leasing. They are responsible for only certain types of maintenance, such as cleaning, but then they're not responsible for renovations. So they would be subscribed to certain teams. So they'd be subscribed to the leasing team.
Okay.
So we have these, again, what I'm calling groups of tasks or policies within groups of tasks. And so whoever we're working with, if we're working with someone in more than just a subcontractor capacity, if they're really coming on and spending substantial time with us each week, then we determine what teams they will and won't be involved with. And ultimately that encourages us to task batch and encourages everyone to stay on topic in terms of what their topics are and what they're familiar with and what they're working on and what they're not.
Another subject I'd love to dive into with John is leasing and day-to-day management. Do you have that combined, or are those 2 separate functions? And either way, I'd love to hear why.
They're relatively separate. So we have someone who works in leasing who has quite a bit of autonomy, and they would, to a large extent, communicate with applicants and handle that without my knowledge. In terms of people who then become our customers, our tenants, actually move into the property, they would have more access to me than they would during the application phase. So we do hand it off, because if someone has some initial questions, or they're not a customer, they're not involved with us yet, it's unlikely that they're going to reach me. And once they are our customer, they understand that if I'm legitimately needed, I can legitimately be reached.
Gotcha.
But nevertheless, as our teams are set up now, the same key people are involved in both the, let's say, before the lease signing and after the lease signing. It's just that we handle the responsibilities differently.
Love it. Any last minute tips or tricks before we wrap up this video as far as property management or outsourcing property management?
Well, it's tough to say, and I sometimes the best tips sound like platitudes, or they're cliche, or they rhyme. Hire the right people. Why would you hire the wrong people? I get that, but I think you just have to work hard on your policies every day. And I know that's not specific, but at the end of the day, the more attention you pay to what's going on in your business and why it's going on and what you need to do about it and want to do about it, the more headway you're going to make. I think documenting is also exceedingly important. We now use software to document a lot of things that used to be kept either on spreadsheets or even in the calendar. Putting things in your calendar is great, but at some point you need to move it to a different type of software as well. And we just try to track more and more all the time. Frankly, if there's something that we know to track, but we're just not going to get to it, we note it and then start tracking it the next year. So every year we try to keep a tighter focus on every single metric, and again, what you don't measure, you don't manage.
So you're constantly improving your process. It's not like you reach one destination and you're done.
Exactly. It really is. It's ongoing and it's never going to stop. But the more progress you make, the happier and more productive you'll be.
Awesome. Thanks, Jon.
Thanks.
Thanks again to Jon. I think that was some fire information. If you guys got value from this video, jump in that comment section, show us your support, because property management, managing properties from afar, not necessarily the most popular subject matter to go viral on YouTube. So if you guys could help us out with that algorithm by jumping in the comment section, I would greatly appreciate it. If you guys want to see more Jon Kepler, check out this playlist right here. If you guys want to just learn more real estate in general, check out this playlist down there. Again, thanks again for watching this video. Smash that like button, hit the subscribe button if you're new to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video.